Christian music song formula. 3 chords, simple rhymes, vague struggles. Boom, hit song.
Got me down, I'm at the end of my rope. So here's an out of context Bible verse about hope.
My crew is big and it keeps getting bigger. That's 'cause Jesus Christ is my name.
Christian music discussion. Good afternoon, morning, or evening, depending on where you're listening to this, and thank you for tuning back into Christian music discussion with Paul. That would be me. This is episode 2, and if you caught our last episode, it was discussing quite possibly one of my favorite Christian music songs of all time, and if you haven't caught that one, feel free to flip back and go take a listen to that if you have the time, or whenever you finish up this one. I promise you'll enjoy it, and you might even learn something new about an artist you might not have known about. Today's topic is a little different, though. We're going to shy away from listening to music together. The YouTube overlords don't like it whenever we listen to copyright music. Shame. So instead, today, I wanted to talk about something that might be pertinent to you in your life, or maybe you know somebody who could use this message, somebody who needs to hear what I'm about to talk about. And if you've taken a look at the title of the episode, you'll notice it is titled, How Much is Too Much? Now, if we're talking, Parmesan cheese at Olive Garden, no such thing as too much. Olive Garden, if you want to sponsor the channel, that'd be great. Let me know. I'm not joking. But no, in all seriousness, we are talking about how much is too much in regards to Christian music in the worship space. Now, I just collectively felt everybody kind of take a step back or freak out. I promise this is not going to be divisive. That's not what we do here. The goal of this channel is to inspire people and to lift people up and help people be better leaders, better musicians, better servants of God, if you will. So with that in mind, the question is, how much is too much in the worship space? How much is too much in the church? How much is too much for your youth meeting? Now, let me go ahead and start us off with a story just to set the table a little bit. As you may or may not know, if you've listened to some of my other podcasts, you probably already know this, but I have a background in worship and in leading out in a church. I am a pastor's kid, after all. Shout out my pastor's kids. Woo! But with that background comes problems. Those of you who are sitting there who may be worship leaders yourself, or you participate in song service, whether that's as part of the praise team, maybe you're the AV guy, maybe you're the bassist, who knows? But if you've participated in Christian music before, you have probably been part of a discussion where there was a debate over whether or not the music you were doing, or the music that the group wanted to perform, was too much for the worship service that you were participating in. Lord knows that's happened to me. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't handle it with the most grace all of the time. And that was because, I was a teenager and I was very strongly opinionated. Is probably the best way I could put it. As I got older and I moved into my early 20s, things kind of mellowed out with age and with experience. But that doesn't change what I struggled with when I was young and I was trying to make my way in the church in the leadership and worship space. And it certainly doesn't detract from the validity of the viewpoints of the young people in the church that, they want music that speaks to them. They want music that they're familiar with. They want music that they are used to hearing. And we'll circle back around to this at the end of the podcast, but I want to state for the record right now, before we go into this sort of semi-deep dive, that everybody's opinions on Christian music, so long as they're grounded in faith and belief and a true sense of respect for worship, are valid. Now, you're going to say, Paul, that sounds crazy. I promise you, let me tell you the story first, and you may reconsider. So, wind the clock back, let's call it 15 years. I don't want to date myself a little bit too aggressively. I attended a conference in Seattle. It was a youth conference for up-and-coming leaders for our church, and there were many different topics. If you've ever been to one of these youth conferences for church leadership, you'll know that there's something for everyone. They cover everything from how to be a better servant to the community to niche stuff like, what music are you playing? How is it helping or hurting your church, etc., etc., etc. Guess which one I found myself at? And I was sitting there and I was listening to a former jazz musician talk about how the church and the concept of worship has gotten trapped in showmanship, in creating a product that's visually appealing, or perhaps creating a project that has a little bit more pantomime and a little bit more show than, say, your standard worship service, which is, the organ and the piano and everybody sings out of the hymnal and it's very nice and pretty bland. And was my opinion back then, and quite frankly, it still is to this day. But again, no shade towards that style of worship. It's just not for me. So I'm sitting there in this conference, and I'm noticing that a lot of the points that this guy is hitting are shockingly descriptive of my praise and worship group that I was currently part of. It was a pretty decent sized worship group. It was about 12 people, various moving parts. We had a drummer, a bassist. I was the electric guitarist / singer. There was a few other singers and other instrumentalists that would rotate in and out. And I'm sitting there listening to this guy talk about how worship has evolved from something that was initially aimed at glorifying God into something that is basically its own rock concert. And initially I bristled at the statement. I completely disagreed with it. I said, everything that we're doing is for the benefit of the young people that have come to our church and are expecting a certain style of worship, or, expecting to be moved in a certain way. And I started making these excuses, almost justifying what we were doing. Now, I'm going to preface this by saying that in no way, shape, or form am I knocking any of what I'm about to say. I am just saying that it was not appropriate for our church. We used to have multiple lights. I mean, I say multiple lights. It was upwards of 12. And I know people with big churches and hundreds of lights are laughing at me right now. But hey, super small conservative church in the South, we did not have hundreds of lights. We did not have some kind of like Coachella style setup, unfortunately. I am slightly envious of those of you that do have that. But that's not my point. In essence, we tried to create as dramatic of a show as we possibly could with the equipment that we were given. We tried basically to bring down the house every single time we got together and made music for worship. Now, here's the problem with that. A church is not a monolith, and neither is any one particular worship service. If you gear your worship service to cater to one specific group and leave everybody else out in the cold, you will alienate folks. Not only that, but you will actively sabotage yourself, because well, you know what? Here's a better example. Let's look at it this way. Did Jesus have a specific message for a specific age group? No. Did Jesus have a specific way of speaking to a certain age group? No. He spoke to young and old exactly the same. Now, that might not necessarily be true for worship, but it is true in one important way. You have to consider everybody that is in your audience. You cannot leave people out. You cannot say, oh, well, this worship service isn't really for you. Sorry, maybe you should try back on our Sunday morning service with the organ. No. People came to your church for your service. You are required to work with them. Give them an experience that uplifts them, that moves them, that brings them closer to God. And that means not redlining your worship service to the very edge of what the pastor says is acceptable every single time. It's a harsh truth. If you don't like it, I'm sorry. I had to live it to learn it. And when I was sitting in that conference and hearing this guy talk about how making worship a show is detracting from worshiping God. It all hit me like a ton of bricks, and I realized, oh wow, we have had the wrong mindset this entire time. And before all of the drummers and guitarists, and I was one of you guys before before you guys start yelling at me in the comments, I'm not saying that there's no place for this stuff in music, because that is in Christian music, because that is the mistake that pastors and youth leaders and even conference speakers make. They think that the cure for this is just to remove these instruments from the worship service altogether and stick with pianos, violins, and harps and organs. And I'm sorry, but that is also not the answer, because that's going too far in the other direction and then leaving younger people in the cold. So what's the solution? It's something that's the solution to pretty much every interpersonal problem in life: communication. If you're out there and you're a worship leader, if you're out there and you're part of a worship group, and you're sitting here listening to this and thinking like, oh wow, yeah, that's totally our situation right now. We've had this issue with praise and worship where we can't really seem to land on a line, and everybody's kind of happy, but we're not really doing the best we could be. This is what you need to do. 1, you need to consider your audience. Figure out what your demographics are. Do some data research or data gathering if you have to, but figure out what your demographics are. Figure out what people are listening to. Figure out what moves people. If you don't know what moves people, look out in the audience when you're leading in worship and see who's excited, see who's moved, see who doesn't like it. Maybe you don't necessarily want to talk to them straight up and say, hey, did you not like my worship service? But get a sense of your audience, get a sense of what's going on. From there, open up a dialogue with your pastor, open up a dialogue with your youth leader, and figure out, hey, some stuff that we're doing is working and some stuff that we're doing isn't. Why do you think that is? Do you think there's a spiritual reason for it? Do you think some people just musically don't like what we're putting down? It's important to ask these questions, because I feel like a lot of the time, whenever a worship team receives criticism, I know this is true from my experience, what ends up happening a lot of the time is that it's seen as adversarial, it's seen as confrontational, or maybe just insulting. Maybe you feel like you put out a good product and people are tearing it down, or they're tearing down your body of work. But that brings me to my second point. Communication is key, yes, as a worship leader, and for what we're discussing here, to avoid going too far in your worship service. But here's the second thing: get over yourself. Boy, did I have a problem with that one. It took years in a conference for me to get over myself and remove myself from the music. Because guess what? When you're on that stage and you are singing or playing an instrument or participating in any way, you are not up there so people can look at you. You are not up there so people can say, oh wow, Paul is such a great guitarist, or he's such a great vocalist, he really moves me. No, that's not the point. That's not what we're doing here. Whenever we lead worship services in our churches, we are doing it to point to God. We're doing it to bring people into a headspace that prepares them to receive the message that's coming up, or maybe drives home the point of the message that they just heard. And that is your sole mission. There is nothing else that you need to be worried about in terms of worship other than, did I help people either A, prepare to receive a message, or B, understand a message or feel a message more fully after they heard it. If you are not aiming at those things, that means that you are, by extension, glorifying yourself, whether you like it or not. I mean, I would polish up my guitar and, make sure everything looked good for the show and things like that. But the fact that I was even calling it a show is the problem. Now, I'm not saying to be raggedy on stage. Please have respect for wherever you're performing. But at the same time, you're not AC/DC. There's no need for headbanging on stage. There's no need for some of the crazier behaviors that are generally associated with performance art. This is a worship service. And the simple fact is, a lot of musicians, Christian musicians, either know of this but choose not to follow it, or don't know of this at all because they're just kids who like playing music, and a church is the most readily available form of a band that they have. So if you're a leader in these situations and you see that some of your kids are feeling a certain way when it comes to stuff like that, sit down and talk to them. Let them know that this isn't about performing for the sake of performing or performing for the sake of glorifying an individual. Let them know why we do what we do. Because honestly, worship is one of the most powerful things that we as humans can experience. A good, well put together worship service that does not detract from God, does not detract from the message, and solely focuses on uplifting is a powerful thing. My wife initially, for the first, we'll call it maybe the first half of her life, was a Pentecostal. So she got to experience a lot of really powerful, really moving worship services, and worship through music is still one of her go-tos. It still moves her to tears on a regular basis. What we do is powerful. And if you put yourself in front of that, you're watering down the message, you're blocking the light. Step out of the spotlight a little bit. Now, for those of you who have listened to some of my other podcasts, you might be wondering, well, Paul, it sounds like you're setting a lot of rules, but you're not really giving musicians place to play, which isn't normal for you. You're a musician. And you'd be right. So that brings me to my third point, which is make it interesting. Now, what in the world does that mean? Wouldn't that be drawing attention to yourself? Wouldn't that be detracting from the message? No, not exactly. Because, and this is something that, my musicians out there, you probably already know about this, but this is for the rest of the group. There is something in music that gives musicians joy, and that is musicianship. The ability to actually flex your, whether it's lyrical or guitar or whatever, but flex your muscles a little bit. The ability to try to do something a little bit more complicated. Now, how does that factor into worship? Obviously, you're not going to ask your violinist to, well, God forbid your violinist decides to play The Devil Went Down to Georgia, but you know what I mean? Like a violin solo like that's probably not really appropriate for church, right? Okay, yes, I'm not saying that that's what you need your violinist to be doing. But what I am saying is that Christian music doesn't have to be boring. That's practically the tagline for this channel. That was the point of the intro you just saw earlier, and that is the point of what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to create, hopefully, a space where Christian musicians understand the responsibilities that they're faced with, but they also understand that they aren't necessarily limited to the same 4 chords and the same basic song structure. Make it interesting. Change things up a little bit. Here's a great example. My brother and I, we did a lot of acoustic unplugged sets. We would bring the energy down, we would bring the lights down, we would unplug. When I say unplug, I mean really, we would unplug everything and have whoever was in the sanctuary gather in the front. We would kind of rope off the back half of the sanctuary and have everybody come up to the front so they could hear the musicians, they could hear the instruments and all of that. And it created this really intimate, private worship experience where it almost felt like you were kind of all gathered around like a living room or gathered around a piano or something and everybody was singing. And that vibe, I guess you could call it, really brought us in for what was the close of a week of prayer. And it brought everybody into a prayerful, aware, and present mindset that was perfect for what we were trying to do. And let me tell you something, none of the musicians were bored, because it is a challenge to play unplugged. It's a challenge to sing without a mic, and it is a challenge to bring your set's energy level down to match what you're trying to do for that worship service. And that right there is the key to keeping your musicians, I don't want to say entertained, but engaged and feeling like they're contributing something. Because so often in praise and worship, it's all about the singers, which I firmly hold is incorrect. One of the great alternative or progressive experimental bands of all time, Tool, which one day we are going to cover those guys on this channel just because they really do take some deep dives in spirituality, but that's neither here nor there. What they do for a lot of their shows is the singer literally hides at the back of the stage and contributes his voice to mix with the other instruments and produce an incredible sound. Now, That doesn't work if the instruments are playing boring parts, or if what they're playing isn't necessarily matching what the singer's putting down, or if what they're playing isn't dynamic. So naturally, if you've ever listened to Tool, Tool is none of the things I just said. It is dynamic, it's interesting, it's intricate, it can be beautiful, it can be sobering, and the same is true of Christian music. Or at the very least, it can be in your worship service. But you have to emphasize musicianship. You have to emphasize creativity in the bounds that I gave in the previous 2 points. And if you can find that balance of, hey, this musician came up with a cool idea for the transition from the chorus to the bridge. Can we work this in and then maybe pull everything out except for the piano and just let the chords ring and let everybody sing at the top of their lungs? Things like that. You don't have to, I'll put it this way. You don't have to make your set interesting by making it loud. You don't have to make your set interesting by making it rock. You don't have to make your set interesting by throwing a bunch of lights and smoke machines up there. You just have to find a balance that works with the people that are in your audience, that doesn't put any one musician front and center for everybody to stare at like it's a concert, and that still highlights and, what's the word I'm looking for here? Emphasizes, I guess you could say, or underscores the talent that your musicians have and how they are using those God-given talents to glorify Him. Because musicians, just like singers and just like everybody else in the church, has a purpose for why they're there, and they have something that God has given them that they want to share. I mean, quick back to the conference really quick. My brother's a drummer, and he got up for a Q&A and asked the conference speaker, so I play drums, that's my God-given talent. Are you saying that that has no place in a church? And the guy turned and looked at him and said, yes, I'm saying that. And so my brother said, okay, well, what do I do with my talent? And you're not going to believe this, but the guy looks my brother dead in the eye and says, God will give you another talent. If I could borrow a phrase from one of my favorite podcasters, Darapy, if you haven't listened to him, he's on YouTube. He's kind of the guy that gave me the idea for this. I'm going to borrow a phrase for that guy. Wing wong. I can't do it like he does, but you get the idea. The point is that that's not at all the correct thing. That's not the correct approach to take with somebody who has a God-given talent in music. You just find a way to work that into your worship service using the parameters I gave you. And that's it. I could sit here for hours and talk about, this is my specific situation, here's what to do here, and I could really try and get tangled up in all the rules and different things that I believe are correct here, there, and everywhere for different worship services. It would take me hours. I'm tired just thinking about it. So I tried to, in the last 25 minutes or so, just kind of summarize what I've learned that makes a worship service good. So in summary, because I know I've been going for a while, communication with your youth leaders, with the pastors, with members of your team, with everybody else on the effect that your worship service is having on your audience. Is it having a positive or a negative effect? Is it working or not working? Are people being turned away because it's too much, or are not enough people coming because it's not enough? You've got to work with church leadership on that. You have to find a balance that works for everybody, because guess what? You guys are all in this together. You guys are all working towards the same goal of glorifying God. You just have different talents and different ideas for how to get there. Number 2, step out of the spotlight a little bit. Move out of the way and let God shine through. When you're on stage, when you're participating in the stuff, even in practice or anywhere that you are, in life, let God shine through. You are not the star of the show. God is. You are not here to glorify yourself. You're here to glorify God. And finally, point number 3, make it interesting. And if it's already interesting, keep it interesting. Some of the greatest worship services I've ever participated in had no drums, but they were so intricately put together with so many different musicians all coming together and showing their talents that it was just so much fun to be a part of, and it was such an uplifting experience for everybody in the church. What is interesting for you in your church may vary. Please see point 1, communication. Always, always, always come back to point 1. in anything that you do in church as a leader, come back to communication, because that is the number one thing that will keep you moving. It's the number one thing that kills worship teams, that kills youth groups, that kills churches, is lack of communication between leadership and members, lack of communication between leadership and other members of the team that they're leading. You've got to keep those lines of dialogue open more than anything. Now, this has been honestly a kind of a heavy one for me. This one is something that is very near and dear to my heart, as it's something I struggled with for a long time before I figured it out. I would love to hear your takes, whether or not you agree with me. I'd love to hear how I'm wrong. I would love to have any kind of open dialogue or discussion, so please drop your comments below. And if you liked this video, please share it. If you really liked it, give it a thumbs up. It's a huge boost for the channel. I would greatly appreciate it. I want to get this content in front of as many young leaders in religion as I can, because these principles are true no matter what creed or doctrine or denomination you're part of. A lot of these principles apply across the board. So like it, share it, get it out there. If you know somebody that could use this, maybe needs to hear this, send it their way. And just a quick aside for next time, I think I am going to bring up Tool in our next episode of this podcast. I think we're going to go over Jambi. And for those of you who know Tool, you know exactly what kind of song that is in terms of how it handles religion and the struggles. So it's an exciting one. Stay tuned. Hopefully I'll have another one out for you next week. Until then, be blessed, take care, and I will catch you next time.